Welcome to day 27 of our Inktober Zentangle challenge. And Gayle, are you feeling what I'm feeling today?
I'm feeling it.
Yeah, we're just feeling the need for some yeed. So let's kick the tires and light the fires and let's start drawing today's tangle. Yeed. Well, my silly reference to Top Gun aside, today's tangle pattern is called Yeed. It is by Midori Furuhashi, and I'm going to be placing it on my pattern or on my layout right down in this area. But first, let me just show a couple details about this tangle. In this year's Inktober, there have been a lot of ribbon-based tangles. And a lot of artists are taking those ribbon elements or elements from the ribbon and creating a separate tangle. But once again, I'm going to try to retain the basic original essence of this tangle pattern, so I will do it as a ribbon. So we're going to create two borders. They can be double-sided, extra thick, whatever you want, but we're going to create two borders, and the way I'm going to draw it is to create the seed shape, which forms that central component. I'm going to create that evenly spaced, touching both borders, and I'll show you why. There's different versions, but I want to do a little connection with mine. Now, once we have our seed shapes, we're going to draw the stem of the Y. This is where the name of the pattern actually comes from, according to the step out, is that it's seed shapes with a Y. So a Y in seed becomes yeed. So once we create our seed shapes and we create a little stem there, now we're going to finish making the Y by connecting the top of our seed shapes with that stem. And that is the essence of yeed. Now, the embellishments that I'm going to use will come as I create an inner aura to the seed shape and ink this, so that will just be repeated. And I'm also going to create an inner aura on this top triangle piece that becomes evident once we do our layout, and I will ink that as well. This will create some boldness and contrast in the shape in our little pattern here. Then when we do the shading, I may choose to do some hatch marks like this, which will create a little bit of a dimensional edge that we can then work with our shading, or I may just rely on the graphite itself to create that impression. But that is the essence of the yeed shape. So having said that, I'm going to create mine down here in what was the right-hand lower corner of my layout. So I'm going to first establish my borders. I'm kind of gauging here where I want to draw this, and I'm going to draw my line right down like that. That's my top border, and I'm actually going to target this corner here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I want to kind of gauge how tall or wide I want this to be, and I think about like that is going to work. And I'm going to try to keep this line pretty parallel to this line up above. I don't want it to be, at an angle in this case. Not that an angle would be bad, but this is how I want to do that. So now I will create an aura line. I want a double border on mine. And I'll do that to the other side as well. Actually, I'm going to flip it around because I want to do it on the outside, so I want to draw in this direction. Now we can get back and just create those seed shapes. So I want to keep them roughly evenly spaced, as I mentioned, but I'm going to start right here in the center just because it's easier for me to see where to place that. And then I'll space them from either left or right side. So these seed shapes are real easy. You're just creating a little bit of a curved line. I'm going to draw this one behind, just like that. And so now roughly that same space, you can use your pen to measure, you can use your fingers, and you'll know roughly where you're going to go. Or you can just eyeball it too, if you trust your vision that way to measure that for you. And mine's going to come right in there. It's going to be a tiny little peek out. And now I'm going to draw about halfway or a little higher than halfway. Right between these, I'm going to draw the stem of that Y shape that we talked about, or that I mentioned at least. And now we can complete our Y by just targeting that stem. And you could draw it differently. You could draw these top pieces first, but the reason I like to do this is it just gives me a target visually for drawing my lines. And it just makes it easier to have some kind of a symmetry between those shapes. At least I think it makes it easier. You may disagree. Now I'm going to just create the auras that I mentioned. So they will go inside my seed shapes. And then I'll create an aura also in these triangular areas. And as far as adding those other little lines, I'm going to ink this first and just see how bold this looks on the page before I decide to put in the additional inking lines here. So and looking at that, I think I will do some fine lines on one side, the consistent same side of this, so that it creates a beveled or an angled look. And so that, for me, finishes this particular pattern. Now to add some shading, I think what I'll do is put a little bit down here in the what would be the valley in my thinking of these beveled areas. I'm just putting some little swirls here that I can blend outward. And so this is the finished version, at least my version, of today's Tangle pattern, Yeed. Before we finish today by showing Gayle's version and what she decided to do, we are going to respond to a Toon Alert. We have got another Toon Alert. So as we respond to today's Toon Alert, I'm going to use this space on my layout right down here in the lower left. And you might want to start with your pencil because we're going to draw. This isn't terribly complex, but it might be something you want to give a whirl to before you ink it in. So my shape here, it's kind of got a nice little area and a little peak over here. So I'm going to make use of that. I'm going to draw a nice long shape like this, almost like a seed shape from today, if you will. And then we're going to just make a little bump here and come up. And let's do a little bit of a curved line like this. And then down here, I'm going to bring out a few little things. Kind of like this. And we're going to go down here, and right up there we're going to add an eyeball because we're adding a crow tucked in behind our elements here. And so his feet are going to come down here. And I'm going to doctor some of this. I'm just making these little lines. And then he's going to be standing on a rock. So I'm going to have this rock go off there. And we'll have a toe or two peeking over on this side. Little claws to him once we decide to do that. And basically, we're going to have this just like that. So we're going to make a few feathery symbols. I'm going to more or less ink this pattern in completely, much like we did our bat or our cat that we did earlier. But we're going to add some white highlights to it to make it stand out a little bit as a crow peeking out down there. But he's not a mean crow or a bad crow, but he's not always giving us the best sign here, right? Because crows sometimes represent something ominous. Well, we're going to just draw this guy and see he can be as friendly or as mean as we want him to be. So now I'm going to ink this in. So I'm just going to take my shape that I've created here. I'm going to make this little guy peeking out over here. Now his eye, once we ink everything in, he's going to kind of get lost in there, so we want to just draw it so we know what we're looking at. And I'm creating some little feather-like shapes as we go down. Little fuzzy leg coverings there, if you will, where his wings might come down, and then this is just going to go up. Little teardrop shapes. Little hooks now for the talons. Just like that. And now we know we're going to have some wing shapes here. So what I'm doing is just drawing some very simple indicators for myself, because that is where I will put some white lines, and I want to see how that's going to look here as I go. So we're going to do something like that. And then, of course, we'll have the rock, which is, he's just standing there on a little rock. Make a couple little shapes here that might indicate some edges to the rock. Nothing fancy here. Just some fun little shapes as we add our cartoon. Now, if your pencil marks aren't exactly where you put your ink, you might want to erase them just so you don't confuse yourself when you're looking at the rest of your shape. But again, as always, just be careful that you don't erase any shapes or shading right next to your little crow sticking in there, this raven. And once you're happy with that basic layout, the basic placement, let's add also a little bit of a, like a nostril hole there on his beak. Maybe a tiny line for the bottom half of the beak. And now we can ink this. Now this might look different than what you imagine, because it will change once we add our white lines in. But we're basically going to fill in this whole character. And what you can do is leave yourself a little space maybe where you put those other lines if you did. The lines that are going to indicate feathers and so on. Because then that will know, you'll know that's where you're going to place some of that white ink. In fact, if you inked it very carefully, you wouldn't even need the gel pen. You could just leave some open areas there if your paper is white, of course, and just ink in everywhere but those highlights. So now you can already see, just by how I left some of those highlights, a little bit of what that's going to look like. Now I'm going to go back to my smaller pen to fill in and ink some of these little details here that I just couldn't fit that larger nibbed one into. And I think for his claws, I'm not going to ink those in, or his feet, but I am going to add some little roundings just to give the impression of shape to him. And maybe his talons will be black. They'll be inked in so they stand out a little bit more. Alright, now we can add a touch of this white gel. We want to add it maybe along this outer edge here. This is just a very simple silhouette type shape, but we're adding a few highlights to make it look like it has some form and some details. But I don't want you to be bothered by it. And like always, my disclaimer, if you don't want to put the tunes in your drawing, you don't have to do it. It's not necessary. It's not required. It's just a fun element for those who enjoy doing that. And now we can add a little bit of graphite shading if we want to as well. Maybe around his feet, where this rock is. to help with a little sense of shadow coming from his body or his depth in general here. We can add just a tiny bit maybe to his beak. And if we need to, we can always put a little white up around his eye there too. If you ended up getting that smaller than you wanted, you can make that a little bit larger. And if you've used gel pen and you want to touch up anywhere, you go ahead, but remember, wait for it to dry, because otherwise it'll gunk up the end of your pen and it'll frustrate you there. But just go ahead and shape some of those white spots if you need to, or put little marks through them that might help it look a little more like it's part of those things and not something on top of them. That's what I like to do there. Run a little bit of a few very fine lines through those white marks. Just helps them to kind of blend in like they're part of the feathers. And so here we have a bird's eye view, no pun intended, of our progress up through today. But let's take a look and see how Gayle's came out for today. What do you have here, Gayle?
I fit mine over there.
All right, little different position altogether.
Yep.
So Gayle decided to do her version of Yeed right there. And I see you did do a different version, which is kind of cool. You filled it with the orbs. We've got some lines here instead of inking.
Yep.
Nice. I like the variety, the variance. And looks
Thank
like
you.
your bird is in the very similar place.
Yep, he fit in best there, but you had to help a little bit.
Well, I
with that.
gave you a little guidance. You're not used to drawing cartoons like many people, so I was happy to help. But you did it. You did the work. I just gave you some suggestions. But that's fine, and I think yours turned out great. It kind of tucked in behind the ribbon, similar to mine.
Yep.
And in fact, let me show something here to folks as we do our side-by-side, as we often do. Let's zoom in. So on mine, real quickly, I decided, actually, as I was helping Gayle and hers came behind that ribbon, I realized that mine was a little truncated without his tail feathers sticking out back. So I just added some tail feathers out back just to make his shape a little more like it might be. Even though he's just a cartoon, I didn't want him to look like he was a stubby little crow or anything like that. And Gayle's is nice and long in there as well. So here we've got her Yeed and the raven. And over there is my Yeed. Let's do those side by side so people can see that, the differences. And then, of course, our ravens are very similar, but different. And folks, that is it for today's session. As always, we're so very thankful that you've tuned in to watch, or hopefully better yet, to draw along with us. And we've got just those few days left, so we look forward to seeing everyone back for those last several sessions. Until then, take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.